Well, hello everybody, and welcome to my very messy office. Thanks, Alina, for that introduction, and thank you to you all for joining us again for this lecture series, Art Matters. And here we are in Santa Barbara. Many of you may be not in Santa Barbara physically, but I hope you do come and see us very soon, as we're hard at work at reinstalling our newly renovated galleries, which will be opening in just a short week or so. August 15th is the big day. So if you are in Santa Barbara, I hope to see you very soon in person, even if we are all wearing masks again. But I won't talk about that since I know we're all sick of thinking about what we must do in these trying times. Instead, I'd rather talk about something much more fascinating and pleasant, which is the fascinating conservation of the Ghent Altarpiece. So we're so fortunate to be able to welcome with us today the lead conservator on this incredible project, Bart Devolder. He's now the first chief conservator at the conservation labs at Princeton University Art Museum. But he's been actually at Princeton for quite some time. I first met Bart when he was working at the Kimball Art Museum with my dear colleague Claire Berry. And we had the good fortune of working on a really fun project on analytic cubism, which was presented at the Kimball as well as here at the Santa Barbara Museum of Art. And from that, I can tell you that he is a magician because he can inhabit so many different types of art making and master those skills as all great conservators do. And he's worked on such a wide variety of art from many different time periods, and including the great analytic cubist pictures by Picasso and Braque. But can you imagine working on the Ghent Altarpiece? Now, to art history, this is sort of the most amazing object anyone could have the opportunity to touch, let alone inhabit the way that he has. And he's so kindly agreed to share his now fond memories of having completed this project, which occupied him for quite some time. And just a little bit about Bart. He's got a degree in painting conservation from the Royal Academy of Fine Arts in Belgium, in Antwerp. And he's worked at many prestigious museums, including the Louvre, Harvard University Art Museums, National Gallery of Art, and then, of course, the longer stint that he had at the Kimball Art Museum, where he worked on so many fantastic things, I know, with Claire. And now he's landed at Princeton, which I'm very happy about since it's my alma mater. And I know that he's quite excited about the new building that will eventually be reopening. I guess that's in late 2024. So he's going to have a brand new conservation lab. And right now he's in new temporary digs, but I'm sure that's a very exciting prospect for everybody at Princeton. So with that, I'm going to introduce you to Bart. So take it away, Bart.
Oh, thank you, Eyck, and thank you, Santa Barbara Museum of Art, for having me tonight. Great to be back in Santa Barbara, although virtually from my children's bedroom. I will come back another time. Let's see if after a year and a half, I somehow still messed this up. So let's try to share my screen. There you go. Hopefully everybody can see it. If somebody can scream yes, I hope it's fine. Yeah, okay, good, thank you. As you can imagine, this has been a project that was multiple years and is actually still ongoing. So a 6-year project potentially turning into 9 or 10 years in 45 minutes. So I will, select certain parts where I would get a little bit more deeper on the topic in the subject. And then others I might go over a little bit fast, and I hope there will be some time for questions and hopefully answers at the end as well. So for those of you that don't know the Ghent Altarpiece, it's a fascinating painting on oak panels. And just to get a little idea of the magnitude of this project, here I try to calculate it in feet. I hope I didn't make too many mistakes. It's very large, and it's quite unique that we have so many paintings by the brothers van Eyck in one place still. Again, right, if we could go over the iconography and the 45 minutes would be over. But important to know is that we have Jos Vet here, the man in red, and Elisabeth Borluut. Those are actually the two donor figures. So they paid for the whole altarpiece. There are many, many, many books written on on the iconography of this piece. And there are also still many, many questions that remain. So we were very excited to start this project and hoping, as conservators often do, hoping to, find maybe new evidence that could help art historians and curators to answer some of these questions. But as often is the case, conservators often find more questions than answers. How do we know that it was painted by the brothers Van Eyck? Well, we were very lucky that this painting actually, when it's closed, I forgot to say, it's a polyptych, so it has movable wings. When it's closed, you can read, if you read Latin, you can read the inscription on the bottom part of the frame. The lower parts, you can see it here, the red letters are very hard to see, but it's actually, and I write it down because it's such a difficult word for me, it's a colorochronogram. So if you calculate the letters that are in red, you actually get the date, which is assumed to be the date the painting was finished, so in 1432. It also says that Hubert van Eyck started the project and that his brother, who was less of an artist, but still quite fantastic since we only know paintings from Jan van Eyck at this time, finished the work. It was painted for this beautiful church. Hopefully we can all travel again soon. You should definitely go visit it. The Saint Bavo Cathedral, which is still standing in very beautiful Belgium, which is here. And then more specifically in the gorgeous city of Ghent, where I lived for 6 years. It was painted, as I said, for Mr. Vet, and he had his own chapel in the church. And that's where it stayed until 1986. 1986 in Belgium, we had a lot of issues with extreme left-wing organizations, and it was deemed dangerous to keep the painting there. And a bulletproof cage was built and replaced the painting and moved the painting to the villa chapel. And this is the first time I'm giving this lecture that I had to add the line until 2021. Because since March of this year, end of March, so I haven't even seen it because of COVID, I haven't been traveling to my home country. There's very, from what I can see from the images, very beautiful new protective arrangement was made. And it was placed now in a very prime location in the center of the apse of the church in the Sacrament Chapel. And we can talk more about that later, but it was placed there, not in the original location, because it is such a popular tourist destination. It's over 300,000 people go see it. What is great about this is that it actually can open and close by a mechanism. So it's fantastic for actually experiencing what a churchgoer in the 15th century would experience from this, like the opening up of an altarpiece, which would be a rare event to witness back in the day. And as many things, they had the opportunity, thanks to this big grant from the Flemish government, to now have a complete interactive experience. So you can get these fancy glasses, and they will create an augmented reality in many cases. And you can, that's why I made this little screen grab here. You can actually visit Van Eyck's studio. But that's not, that's the now, right? Let's talk about the past, as conservators like to do. So this is in the cage or the box that was built in the 80s when it was moved there. There were lots of issues with this cage. Not only was that old school protective glass, it's very much like a Coca-Cola bottle. If you look through it, it's actually not transparent. It's actually very green. As you can see from this photo, the light is not great, right? It's very focused on the lower parts. The top part's kind of dark. But maybe more importantly for this talk today is this is a graph from December 2008. And I won't get too much into details, but just know that these graphs show relative humidity, so the moisture in the air, and the temperature. And ideally, they should be as straight as possible. So it's clear that there is very big fluctuations of both temperature and relative humidity within this box. So luckily that was discovered. And in 2010, there was a very big research project, which among many of the generous sponsors was the Getty. And the goal was to actually examine whether the wood, as I said, it's painted on oak woods, was still good, whether some structural work was needed. And when they were doing it, they said, well, we might as well also look at the front, which is also interesting since it has paint on it. So this was one of the first times in Belgium that people could actually come and see the conservators at work. And they were it's very important, researching it. So you can see all kind of machineries here. This was led by Ron Spronk and Anne van Grevenstein. I wasn't there. I was still, as Eyck said, still happily working at the Kimball, and probably at 2010, maybe even working on the Picasso Braque show. So my colleagues, some of them actually ended up in the bigger team for the actual treatment. What they did was they dusted the painting, they made a lot of images with the microscope, wrote a lot of reports, did some cleaning tests, and did some minor or sometimes quite significant conservation work. This is the judge panel, which was stolen. And so this is the copy. And that one was in the worst condition of all, although it's only at that time 60 years old. And it shows that, you know, how well the Van Eyck brothers manipulated their materials, that a painting that is painted with more modern materials was in worse shape than the original art. So a lot of research was done as well. One of the things they did was infrared reflectography. That's what you can see here. It's a camera that uses infrared rays that make it, you can actually see through the paints. So what you can see, if you look very carefully, you can see the underdrawing of the artist. And I'm circling over this niche here, which was drawn in, but was never painted, because you see there was a wooden ceiling. So the niche was there, but was never painted, which is extra interesting because the niche was painted in the bottom tier of the polyptych. And why is this important, you might say, is there's a lot of discussion whether the top part of the Ghent Altarpiece actually belongs to the bottom part. So this was not a new discovery because it was discovered in the 70s already, but with a newer technology, we could make it much more visible. Another thing we did was, the 2010 team was X-raying the paintings. And in X-ray, it's just like when you have something broken, like if you break your arm, you go to the hospital, have an X-ray taken, and the X-ray penetrates even deeper than the infrared does. And it shows you all kind of damages that I hope you can see. You cannot see them, but you can see them in the X-ray. So all these white specks are parts where the paint just completely chipped away. In addition, it shows you all kind of, in this case, wooden blocks that were screwed to the back of the panel to support it. And this is all important in order to come up with, an idea of whether or not this painting needs to be treated. All that information was then thrown into this beautiful website. I'll put the name up here. You should definitely examine it if you're interested in this topic. Thanks to the Getty, this website was created, and it is just fascinating. And I'll get to the material history because it is important for conservators to try to figure out what happened to the painting in the past in order to restore it in the now. So we know not that much for a painting that is considered by many one of the most important paintings of the medieval, the cross where the medieval painting stops and the Renaissance painting starts. We know that there was a lot of religious wars and unrest, and there were very likely structural alterations because we know from documents that some panels were, in the night quickly hidden in the towers of the church. And I can only imagine having taken these panels out, when you do that in a hurry, that some damages should or probably would occur. We know that before 1550, the predella, which is a painting that is often underneath a polyptych or a multi-paneled painting, that was destroyed. So we have some documentation about that. We also know that there was a very big treatment by two very famous artists themselves, Lancelot Blondel and Jan van Scorel. This was done in 1550. And then from the 17th to the 18th century, we know at least of 4 restoration treatments. And then it gets very complicated. So I made this kind of graph. These center panels that you're seeing blue now ended up in Paris in the Louvre from 1798 to 1816. They were taken by the revolutionary troops and later placed in the Napoleon's museum. Then the wings, or part of the wings, the ones in green here, were actually sold to a dealer and then ended up in Berlin and finally ended up in the Gemälde Gallery in Germany. And then came back in 1920 back to Belgium when the Treaty of Versailles after the First World War was signed, and they were given in lieu of paying for war damage. The easiest ones are actually the Adam and Eve panel. Those were deemed way too risque back in the day, and they were always kind of hidden, and therefore they were sold to the Belgian state because those are not really, at the time, worthy for seeing in a Christian setting. So they are, until this moment, actually owned by the Belgian state, whether the others are not. So what is interesting for us to know is when these paintings, so the ones that were in green, the ones the church sold to Germany, when they ended up in the Gemälde gallery, they installed them, you can see it in this painting here, in this sequence here. But as you can, oh, this is, by the way, not the real, this is a copy, but these are the real ones. So what did they do? They build a wall, and if you go around the wall, you can actually see the back, because these panels are painted on both sides. But if you have a good memory, if you place these two musicians and the singing angels next to each other, facing each other, that means that the angel annunciates and the virgin are looking away from each other, which is, of course, iconographically very awkward. So the Germans, as the Germans often are, the German Grundlichkeit, designed this machine that you see here. And what they did was they actually cut the planks, which are 1 centimeter in thickness. They cut them all the way through, so in their thickness. And you can still see the marks of that saw here. And then they glued wooden battens on the back to support it. So what they really did was they created 2 paintings, so they didn't have to have this awkward hanging anymore. And this, of course, has a big impact on the treatment. Then in 1934, as I mentioned, the Just Judge panel was stolen together with Saint John. St. John was brought back, but the Just Judge panel is still lost. And until this day, every other month or so, there is a big search for the panel. It's almost entering the folklore of Belgium, but it is very much part of the soul of many people in Ghent. And there is still a lot of hope that it will be found one day. Van der Weken, one of Belgium's most notorious restorers / maybe forgers, some might say, made a copy of the panel in 1951, and that is the one that in 2010 the team had to treat. Then 1945, there, if you're interested in what happened there, so the evacuation to Pau, probably a treatment, then they were stored in the castle Neuschwanstein, and then the Nazis took it and stored it in the mines of Alt-Aussee, where they were recovered by the American troops in 1945. But George Clooney explains that much better than I have in this movie, The Monuments Men. So although the movie is maybe not great, the story definitely is. So it's a movie worth seeing, or definitely the book worth reading, The Monuments Men. 1950, when the panels all came back, the ones that were stolen by the Nazis came back to Belgium, a big restoration campaign was carried out by just one person. I mean, luckily a very good person, Albert Philippot, but he had less than a year to work on all the paintings. So that is, of course, a very short time. And luckily, we have a lot of documentation of what he did. But because he had limited time, he really focused on the center panel, the actual lamb, mystic lamb panel. And the other outer wings, like this one, was a very limited treatment. And that is one of the main reasons why, when we started with the project, we wanted to start with the outer wings when the panels are closed, because those we thought had the most consecutive treatments. There was no local, the layers were not disrupted. Kind of, if you see it as an archaeological dig, we thought that the strata or the layers were the most intact in that part. So in 2010, what did they see when they went into the cage? Obviously a whole lot of dust, as you can see here. A whole lot of very, very dark and yellowed varnish. Varnish, when you apply it, is nice and transparent. And over the years, decades, it starts to oxidize, which creates this yellowing effect. And, we know, as you saw from the beginning, of many treatments, but we also know that the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and the 80s, every time they kind of were quickly revarnished to make them look better. And this really has a consequence, as you can see. This is supposed to be white. And, I always describe it almost looks like a giraffe neck. It's where the paint stands up, the varnish kind of pools in there and settles. And then when something gets quickly cleaned, only the higher points, the tops get cleaned, but the brown, the thick varnish really stays in those cavities. There was also a lot of flaking. Hope you can see it here. This paint should be attached and it's actually coming loose of the panel. So with all that in mind, it was decided, okay, it is the panels, the wooden support is in extremely good condition, which just again shows you about the quality of the materials that were used in the 15th century. But it was deemed necessary to do a treatment. What was suggested at the time was that the whole treatment for the whole polyptych would take 5 years, and we would just do a thinning of the varnish layers and consolidate the paint where necessary. Now, this painting, you know, it's quite an important painting. So who do you give that job to? In Europe and in Belgium too, these jobs have to be posted. So you have to officially apply. And luckily the job was given to the Royal Institute for Cultural Heritage, who also was responsible for the 1951 treatment. So we had a lot of access to the documentation from that treatment from the 50s. And then it was decided that the treatment should happen in the Museum of Ghent. This because it's such an important icon, you cannot just put it away for 5 years. Then, of course, the money part, the Flemish government paid 80% and the private sponsor, Fonds bij Latour, paid 20%. We couldn't do all this at once, so as I mentioned earlier, we decided to do it in 3 steps. So phase 1 is the outer panels. Those were shipped to the museum when all these other ones were kept in the cathedral. So 8 panels and 8 frames. And this took us from 2012 to 2016. Phase 2 is 4 panels and 4 frames. We didn't restore the copy, but we did restore its original frame. And you say, but you cannot count because it's 5 frames. So this is not the original frame that's around. So that campaign finished in 19, and unfortunately that's, I mean, fortunately for me, but unfortunately also for me, I did not complete this. So at the end of 18, that's when I left the project. So normally I still say we because I'm still attached. I'm the International Advisory Commission on the project, hoping to start in 2020. But of course, COVID had a big impact on this. And now we are hoping that the treatment will commence again in 2022. But again, it's a new project. It needs to be, you know, put open for bids again. And of course, it is my hope that this will be given again to the Royal Institute since they've done the first 2 parts. And the third part would be very iconic top parts. So it's not just cleaning a dirty varnish off. Conservation treatments are very complex step-by-step processes. And you can read here all the things, the documentation, the research, everything that goes in it. It's a big team effort. I mean, the whole team, the conservators were only 8 people, but the team behind the conservators, all the scientists and the archivists, it's huge. As I said, we were not going to do it in the cathedral. That was very hard. We were not going to do it in the Royal Institute in Brussels, which would make it much easier for everybody because that's where all the machines are. It's where the restorers are. But it was decided that this gallery here was a perfect gallery to do it. And this is when I arrived, when they were kind of painting the studio. And, you know, it's interesting. It was decided to do the whole treatment in a kind of fishbowl so that people could see every step. Monday to Friday, we work. Saturday, Sunday, we don't work, but people can still see the paintings. And then the beautiful September 2012, I'll never forget the day, is the day the panels were taken out. You can see this quite elaborate, I don't know if you know the game, the Jenga game, very elaborate system of this scaffolding, because it's the only scaffolding you can get in there in this in the small box. And then special crates were built, and the paintings were safely, although it's only 2 kilometers, with big police escorts taken to the museum. And this is a studio. It's a very beautiful studio, but you know, it's not a conservation studio. It's a gallery turned into a conservation studio. But yeah, we were very happy there to work. It's and I think it's great that people have the opportunity to see conservators at work. And then how do you start, right? I mean, it's first there was a team assembled. We had a very nice a team of 8 conservators. Turned out really nicely how we had a nice divide, since Belgium is an interesting country. We had a nice divide of Dutch and French speaking conservators, and we kind of formed these groups because communication is important when you're working on different panels that belong to one painting. So the first step was to remove the surface grime, and you can see it's quite dirty. So even though it was in an enclosed box, there was still a lot of dirt settling on the painting. Here you see the colleagues removing this dirt with these cotton swabs. the next step then is to figure out how are we going to thin down those varnishes. You know, conservation is not really a big trial and error kind of job. So from research, we knew the type of varnish that was on there. So we knew what kind of family of solvents we had to go to. So the only thing we test here then is the exact mixture. So hopefully you can see those tests here. So once that mixture is chosen, it's safe for us to start removing with small little rolling motion this discolored varnish off the surface. And here you can see this is what was decided, is that we were going to remove all the varnishes that were applied during and after this last big treatment I mentioned from 1951. We were lucky enough that there was some sort of we were able to adjust our solvents that we could actually stop at that moment, because the varnishes that were used prior to that treatment were of a different nature. So this is what actually our job was to bring everything to this state, which I hope you can see it was quite an improvement. Then we had a international commission, which is very important in these big treatments. It's a group of 25, 30 people, nicely divided among conservation scientists, art historians, and conservators, all specialized in Jan van Eyck. So a very specific group of people. So we showed them, we said, this is what it looks like when we thin down the varnishes and go back to the state of 1951. We explained them that it's pretty tricky to consolidate that flaking paint that I mentioned, because there is still a lot of varnish sitting on top of those flakes. So getting any glue underneath those flakes is very hard. And you already, spoiler alert, it was an unanimous decision to continue with the cleaning process. So taking more varnishes off than was planned. And they said, well, can you do that within the very limited time frame of 5 years? And we said, yeah, we'll work even harder. And this is what it looks like. So this is what we kind of felt in the previous slide was white. And this is when you go even further. So removing even more varnishes and almost going as close as to the actual paint. And I often get the question, what with the original Van Eyck varnishes? Those were, as you can remember, so many treatments have been done on this painting since even less than a century after it was completed. Those original varnishes were long gone. So this is where we started to have some issues, right? So when you remove varnishes, you don't only remove varnishes, you also remove retouching, or in this case, very large retouching, which we call overpaint. That is not original. It was applied by a conservator to hide certain damages. So here we are saying, okay, we need to go further, but if we go further, we're going to show all this damage, which we knew was there from our research in the X-rays and the infrared. So again, we were like, oof, can we do this in, 5 years in total, meaning 2 years, a little bit less for this phase 1. It's going to be tricky to have to inpaint all these damages that appear. We said, okay, we'll work even harder. And you can tell, right? There's a reason why this was inpainted. It's a lot of small damage, nothing major, no big parts are missing, but it's a lot of small damage. Luckily, there were fascinating discoveries to keep the morale high. I hope you can see it's pretty faint, but these are actually spider webs in the corner of the room that were painted out while all these damages were painted out. And why do we know that they're spider webs? In the Virgin painting, we actually still saw them. They were not overpainted, so it was easy for us to compare them when these came to light. And it's those fantastic moments that are it's so fun to be a conservator. And then we decided, and this is the painting I worked on, so every restorer was responsible for one panel. And this we thought was the perfect panel and the perfect place in the panel to make this sort of didactic for when we had the many school groups that were at the window or the many visitors on the inside of the studio. So we left in place all the varnishes untouched, what it looked like after the first cleaning. So going back to the varnishes, to the treatment of 1951, and then where we were going, removing all the varnishes. So this stayed on the painting for a very long time because it was very helpful in our lectures. So this is what the painting, the closed polyptych, so phase 1 looks like before treatment, where we were supposed to stop and where we actually went. Quite amazing, I think, that it's how it kept transforming. And this is where the fun started. So we're still happy. We said, oh, we can do it in 2 years. We just, make shorter lunch breaks. then we started noticing all this overpaint. So all this thick paint you see, and if you look carefully, sometimes it runs even over the craquelures, which are these fine cracks that are formed when a paint dries. But you can also see cracks in the overpaint, which I'll get back to later. So this, I think, is pretty obvious. We saw these as soon as we took the varnish off. Sometimes they cover big parts of the painting, sometimes little parts. And you will say, well, why would we spend all this time removing this overpaint, this yellow thick paint, to uncover this? But what is this? This is, for me, one of the most beautiful parts of the entire Ghent Altarpiece. It's Van Eyck taking a brush with almost no black pigment on it and just kind of sensually moving the brush hairs over the already dry white paint to create this little scuff mark. And what is the scuff mark? It's the veinage of the marble. So before the treatment and before the removal of the varnishes and then the removal of the overpaint, it was impossible to see this beautiful, high polished and the veins of this marble. I mean, for me, this is what I do it for. This is just beautiful. Another issue that we started seeing when we, every so many times we put them all together, is that we noticed that this wall, which is supposed to be a wall in one room where the Annunciation happens, is that these walls are very light and these are very dark. So after research, which we take sometimes little paint chips smaller than the head of a needle, a pin, and then again all the other imaging, we really found out that these walls were completely overpainted. So here you see it mid-treatment. So we're removing the dark paint to uncover the white paint. And this is what the room looks like after the removal. I hope you can see the three-dimensionality. So I made this little thingy so it's nicer to appreciate it. So before and after. I'll do it one more time. So before, it's really not much of a 3D room, but taking that overpaint off just transformed the whole thing. And again, right, we're saying, yeah, 2 years, we can do it. We don't need special approval. We don't need extra money. We can do it. Keep going further. We discovered these, what we would say almost like impressionistic brush strokes, which are absolutely not Van Eyck. So we removed those. And again, before you remove something, you are 300% sure it's not original. So this is the original paint layer, this orangey one with the big red blobs. Then there is this very thin varnish layer. And then this white, very fine layer is a first overpaint. Then there is a thick varnish layer. And then this is the really thick impastos that I just showed you. So we could we could remove this without damaging the original paint because there was a varnish separating the original with the overpaint. So this is what it looked like when these strange impastos were removed. And this is where it all changed. We had seen these weird little holes. I mean, we saw them in the X-ray black hole here, but we see the hole with our unaided eyes. We could see it, but we say, hey, wait a minute, but this beautiful purple, which looks so real, 15th century to us, it runs into that hole. So maybe this, I mean, we had all kind of romantic ideas. We said, maybe this is something where the artist bumped into it with something and then restored it himself. This is that zone in cross section. So again, we take a little paint chip, put it in a little plastic block, and then we look at it under the microscope. It almost looks like a sushi or like one of those English candies. So you see all the layering structure from the ground layer to all the successive paint layers. And you see that there was a damage and that this pink paint ran into it. So this is the time where we got a little bit worried, and we got some additional funding from the KIK-IRPA Foundation. And luckily, the University of Antwerp was very important in developing this, what was then a very newish machine, this macro XRF scanner. And what it does is it shoots X-ray beams at the painting and it excites the molecules. Oh, there's an X-ray, and they create differential in energy. The molecules they start getting very excited and start jumping around. And it is that energy that then is needed to restore the molecules again that the X-ray, the XRF captures. But until this work from the University of Antwerp, you would get these rather boring looking graphs, which is very hard to read. So what this machine does, so you can see it here in action, it took us 24 hours to scan one painting. So it takes a very long time. It then gives you all the elemental analysis because every pigment is an element, right? So here we see copper, we see lead, we see iron, we see titanium. So then you can just go into Photoshop and say, oh, show me all the copper and show me all the iron. So what we could do was, in this area where we didn't see any damages, we saw clearly in the iron map that there was a fill, which means there too, there was a damage at some point that was completely hidden. So after some more research, a lot of tests, we decided to make a little test window. Now, when we get to that moment, which is a big step in the treatment, we don't always make test windows because, as I said, it's not a trial and error job. We selected this area where there was an existing damage, and we chipped away the paint on top of it and uncovered this very beautiful deep shadow. But more telling was that we started to discover a fold here. I hope you can see it. This is our test window here, a fold that was completely painted out. And more importantly, we discovered these strange, I mean, they're not strange, they're actually the most known thing by Van Eyck's painting techniques, how he puts a highlight between a mid shadow and a dark shadow. And you can compare it to a very well-known painting by Van Eyck, and you see it there too. These highlights that are dividing or separating the mid shadow with the dark shadow. And this is very exciting to find that on Van Eyck. And people might have mentioned that, oh, where are those characteristic paint strokes from Van Eyck? We don't see it in the Ghent Altarpiece. Many reasons were given. It's a big painting. It's supposed to be seen from far, or he had many assistants, therefore he didn't need to go all detailed. Now we know that he did paint them all detailed, as he always did. They were just covered up for many centuries, as we will see later. Again, sometimes we were lucky. The overpaint is sometimes on top of a varnish, which you see here. The bright white light is the fluorescence of the varnish layer. But sometimes the layer was really one with the original paint surface. And this is the map that I will never forget presenting to the stakeholders. So everything in red is completely overpainted. So you have to imagine, right? This is, in Belgium at least, the most famous painting for many people. As I said, many books have been written. And here we are, like certain parts, 70% are completely overpainted. So all these books have been written without actually seeing the real painting. So this is the moment where we said, okay, even if we work day and night and in the weekends, we can never stick to our 2 years per phase system. So we called the International Commission, and you can read it here. So they said they support uncovering Van Eyck's original paint as long as it can be carried out safely. So that is exactly what they're there for, to guide us, to give us information. But they don't have to make the decisions on where are we going to find a couple million euros extra to do the work. So we were very happy that at the end we figured it all out, and it was then decided to go all the way. And in this case, that means taking all the overpaint off that can safely be removed. As I said, you can do it different ways. You can do a cotton swab with solvents, as Livia de Puig, she was the head of the first phase. We obviously do that all under a microscope. Some people like to work upright, some like to work flat. Then for certain zones, we created a system with compressed, so this is a non-woven fabric that we dunk into a solvent. We let it sit onto the paint. Depending on the color, it can be anywhere from 30 seconds to even 3 minutes. And you can see through the capillary power of the fabric, but also obviously the action of the solvent, the varnish and the overpaint gets kind of sucked into the compress, and it loses its hardness. And then if you go over with your cotton swab, you can see it here, it almost all comes off, and you only have to scrape away the residue. If you don't do that, that's how we did it all the way in the beginning. You have to scrape all this away under the microscope with these scalpel blades that are mostly used for eye surgery. And this is what we kind of could do in a day before we kind of came to this system. And sometimes we still had to do it mechanically, so the very slow way. And this is what we uncovered. So hopefully you can see it. Here the overpaint is still present. Here it's already removed. This one I think is gorgeous. You can see again those highlights here. Those were completely invisible with the overpaint present. This one is completely shocking. Beautiful pink, purplish underlayer is what the original is. And this blue one is what was overpainted. So what I forgot to say, one of the reasons why the International Commission of Specialists was pretty quick in agreeing that we should take it all off is that for phase one, not many iconographic changes were done. It was very much to freshen things up. They didn't paint, Baroque clothing on them or something like that. And then you might say, but here, look, they made a blue dress and it was a pink one or a purple one. Actually, we discovered that this was actually purple, but the red had faded over the centuries. And so therefore, the difference in color was much less so when it was originally done. So here you can see what it looks like under the microscope. So you chip away all this blue paint to uncover this almost perfect condition pink drapery, because it was probably protected by this overpaint for many years, or centuries in this case. And this is the before treatment, after all the varnishes are gone, and after removing all the overpaint. I mean, it's truly stunning. And this one, it's still mind-boggling. Why would you overpaint this whole dress since there's almost not a single loss in the paint? At this time where we had all the overpaint removed, we could finally do the much needed consolidation, right? So I took a picture here before and one after. It's never going to be completely flat, right? This paint is 500 years old. We're not going to try to force it flat because then it's going to break even more. So a little bit of glue gets inserted, and then with a little hot tacking iron, the paint chips gets pushed down, and you get a better result, a more flat result. And then this is an important slide. In our profession, especially since 20th century, is that everything we as a conservator do needs to be reversible. And this exactly to avoid what the past restorers did, using the same paint, in this case oil paint, to in-paint or overpaint oil paint. So you cannot differentiate what is what. So what we in our profession do, we apply this intermediate varnish layer, which is just one of the many security measures that we have to know that in 100 years, somebody can easily take off all our work without spending another 3 years scraping away under a microscope. So we apply this varnish layer before we do anything else. And then the next step, yet again, another security layer, safety layer, we fill the losses. You can see all the white specks here. You can see us in painting or filling it in. It's a water-soluble fill material. So if we want a little bit of water, we'll take all those fills out. And then we added an extra safety layer. The first color that we put on it, and again, we literally paint within the lines, right? We are not in painting the original. We used watercolor. So again, if we want, we can take it off with a little bit of water. Then we had another safety measure. We in painted with Paraloid B72, which is a synthetic resin where the pigments are grounded. Then we really wanted to brush varnish the painting. We felt very strongly that 15th century panels, if we can, we like to brush varnish them. But we quickly saw that getting these deep brown tones, we needed a third medium. So that would be Gamblin conservation colors. These paints are so reversible that I always joke, if they see a bottle of solvent, they just fall off. So what does that mean? If after you in paint with those, you cannot brush because you would take everything off. So we decided to put a very thin final spray varnish, which is actually very common in our field, that we apply varnishes with a spray gun. Here you see some before and after treatments. This one with all the the fills, and then after in painting. And again, right, there weren't many big losses. That's why we felt very comfortable in going very far in the treatments, because we didn't have to invent anything. We really knew what was here. You know, it would be a different story if this entire head would be missing. So we went very far in the in-painting process. This little video we made, I can let it go. I wish it was that easy. So you'll see first the varnishes being removed, and then the losses start to appear. And then slowly you start seeing us scraping away the overpaint, you know, uncovering this much more nuanced drapery, but much more beautiful folds. We could actually see the stitch work where, because Van Eyck is such a master of painting reality, you could actually see the stitch work of the fabric in the original. Then with all the fills, and then the in-painting, the first layer of in-painting, second layer, varnishing, and then the frame, which makes it complete. Yeah, I can show many of these, but I don't have too much time, but I'll just show you a couple more. These I think are just stunning, how before they were just kind of one big blend of 4 paintings. Now they really talk to each other. They talk to each other like this, the pink and the green. They also talk to each other this way, and then they talk to each other. I think thanks to the varnish removal and the overpaint removal, they are really much more balanced. Then here are friends again with the interior room, overpaint removed, in painted, and then the most shocking effect, the frames. Very important parts. The frames in Jan van Eyck paintings, when we're lucky and we still have the original frames, they are artworks by themselves. He spent so much time painting and decorating and often signing his work on the frame. So what the frames of the Ghent Altarpiece look like, they're also made in oak. There's a white preparation layer. On top of that, we have two mordant layers that are there to receive what we now know is silver leaf. So all the frames were, I mean, the outside panels were silver leaf. And then on top of it becomes some different color glazes, and then some dots to imitate some special stone, and then the joints. So it was stunning. This was not planned, so again, we had to ask for more money. This is what they looked like before, all black, and after removal, and then after some in painting. And I hope you saw in the previous slide how much they add to the three-dimensional aspect of the paintings. So this is their glam shots. This is what you could buy in the cathedral before treatments, and this is what you can buy in the cathedral right now. So I think we did a pretty good job. You can also buy this book, a little plug. And then don't have much time. I'll have to talk a little bit faster. Second phase, it's the same story, right? So we learned a lot from the first phase, but as I said, this we know Filippo went in there and did things in certain areas, but not everywhere. So again, you can see it. We came in from two sides because we had multiple people working on one painting at a time. The varnish removal is happening here. This is the overpaint that we identified. So, you know, quite a lot of overpaint as well. And here you see us removing the overpaint. So the light green is the original, and the lighter blue also. And, you know, they did a pretty good job matching the original, as good as they could, but they're not Van Eyck. Here you see it more in detail, like how these beautiful shadows were just completely painted out, how the paint itself is a different texture. And I mean, it's just stunning how much more beautiful and refined the original is. Here too, you know, not much time to get into it, but yeah, these gold rays were also found to not be original. Still some question whether the actual dove is original or not, which is very important for the iconographical studies. Then some more fascinating before and afters. This one, you have to look a little bit longer, but you see buildings appear, like this one was not there. And this is where it gets a little bit trickier, right? Remember when I said phase one, there were no big iconographical changes. Here, clearly there are, right? I mean, this building is very different. You'll see some more later. So here, this tower all of a sudden appeared here. This building is different. Here, a lot of research was put in before it was decided to remove it. So we worked with a lot of historians from the city of Ghent. Some buildings are recognizable as buildings from the city of Ghent, others are not. So here with the International Commission, there was many discussions whether this overpaint should be removed. And at the end, it was decided that yes, after a very detailed documentation campaign, it was decided to remove it all. Here as well, you know, this was just all gone, a tower that's partially gone here. So for this particular one, my colleagues made a lot of virtual in-painting on the computer before it was agreed that the tower should look like that. These are just, I mean, as you can imagine, there's many, many meetings before a decision like that gets made. These I think are, I mean, these just look like the same color. Now they're all different nuances of purple, beautiful. These two, I think the difference in the purple tones is just amazing. Here were some losses that went all the way to the wood. It's getting more interesting here with the lamb, you know, pretty big losses. If you remember the x-ray I showed you, these are really damages all the way until the wood. Here, see, complete landscape change. There's a tower all of a sudden here, a tower here. And then just wanted to make sure I had another couple minutes, because this, of course, is the biggest shock to many, how this lamb turned into this thing, much more aggressive looking creature. So in 1951, when Paul Filippo removed all the grass around the figure groups, he discovered another set of ears. And he didn't quite understand what this was all about. So he was concerned and conservative, so left the ears. So since 1951, the Ghent Altarpiece had 4 ears. Now, after a lot of research, it was proven that these ears are part of the same overpainting campaign as the one we've been removing. And therefore, it was, again, that was many meetings, decided to uncover and show the original lamb with this very straight looking eyes. And if you look at a lamb, actually, although this might feel more natural, if you really examine what a lamb's head looks like, they do have these kind of weird eyes. And you can imagine the impact on art historical research. It's a very different, and since it is the mystic lamb, the Ghent Altarpiece is often called or referred to as the mystic lamb. I mean, it's more than mystic now, it's really in your face. And this is where we discovered the fun of social media. So up until this moment, we being very transparent, right? We had the open studio. As soon as the phase 1 was done, everything was added to the Closer to Van Eyck website. This photo, by the way, this took a year and a half before this meme thing started. I mean, it's very funny, but imagine, right? For the church wardens, the people that actually did the work, it just gets a life of its own. And then you can get all the articles that you want. Even Smithsonian tried to validate us that, we didn't do anything wrong. We know what we did. We know we did the right thing. We didn't do anything. We didn't damage anything. And in a way, it's kind of nice and unfortunate at the same time that conservation only comes, or very often only comes in the news when somebody thinks something is wrong. And, so we got a little bit of that, but I think the team really managed it very well. So again, you can see all those images before, during, after. If you read Dutch, you can even read the 180-page thick report that even includes all the solvents we used. And again, full transparency. We are not hiding anything. Thanks to the Getty again and other partners. This was added to the website. All the other Van Eycks in the world, even the ones in America when they were in Europe, were examined with the same equipment as all the research that was done on the Ghent Altarpiece. So now you can decide to, compare the underdrawing of a painting in Bruges, one in Berlin, and the Ghent Altarpiece. So this is a very amazing toy. And again, a toy. It's a toy, but it's also a tool for art historians and art and conservators to use. And that's kind of where I wanted to end it, with this beautiful lamb. So hopefully you enjoyed it, and I'm sure there are some questions. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Bart, you did it. You got through an incredible amount of material, and in pretty much 45 minutes, a little bit longer than that. So that is miraculous in itself. I'm going to check now and see if we have any questions. If you do have questions, please feel free to use the question and answer function. You have some comments. I think Larry Desharoon would like you to display the website resources again so he could catch that, if that's possible, Bart.
Oh, yeah. How do I do that? Do I just, I can just Google it, right? And put it in the chat. Would that be the easiest?
Yeah, that would work. Then you got another comment from an anonymous attendee that said, wonderful lecture, many thanks. From Christine Dancer, you got fabulous lecture, so very interesting. Can't wait to get there and see it. Thank you so much.
Me too. I like to go see it. It's been a while.
Yeah, it must be really odd for you having spent
so
much time with it. So when do you think you are going to be able to get back there?
Well, as I said, right, I'm part of the International Commission now. So once hopefully the money gets approved, and more importantly, if the team is the same team, right, then the same International Commission will follow the treatment. And then, yeah, we hope to convene with the International Commission and the conservation team very early on, before we assume before the treatment of the 3rd phase starts. But it's going to be a big one, right? Because we know that there is some significant overpaint, as you can imagine, right? It's on phase 1 and phase 2, so phase 3 is not going to be that different. It's very exciting.
So I'm sure the specialists are anticipating quite a bunch of new discovery when all of that overpaint is removed. And in fact, you were sort of pointing to some of the humorous aspects that have emerged in terms of social media, but I was wondering if there has been some controversy among the Christian community in terms of how it alters the interpretation of this particular iconic work of art.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's something that, I'm not the best person to speak, but I know that the church warden, Ludo Collin, has spoken about this in public and the news. For him, the newly discovered or rediscovered lamb speaks to him much more as a Christian, because it is so much more confronting with the eyes staring right at you. And I think that's true. And if you look at all the other, powerful animals in the altarpiece, especially the dove of the Annunciation, and in other Van Eyck paintings too, it's very often that those creatures or those representations of God or Christ have that direct, making eye contact. And that was definitely calmed down quite a bit with the much more seduced lamb, subdued lamb. Yeah.
So you did get a question again on iconographic changes from Joy Kuntz. She asked, do you want to speculate on some of the changes in iconographic interpretations? And you just did to a certain extent.
Yeah, the buildings are a bit of a mystery to me. Like, why would you paint another building on top of it? That one for me is very odd. I know it happens with maps sometimes that, the maps get updated. But since this was never it was always a made-up city, although some scholars disagree, but it is, most seem to agree that it's just, buildings that do exist, but not in the same place in the world. So that one is a mystery to me. But another one which is kind of related to iconography is that, and I think one of the biggest art historical discoveries we made, is that we have proven that the inscription is real, which has been questioned by many scholars. So we know that the inscription is part of the first decorative scene of the frames. So therefore making it highly unlikely that it was added later, which then, makes it very interesting that, not only do you have the name of the artists, plural, you have a date, whatever that date means, but then people that are interested in script and in writings from that time, it's very rare that an artist gets mentioned before the donor. Because, the donor is mentioned after you it's all Hubert. And then, yeah, Jan was good too. And then it's only the donor. So, that all is fascinating. That, and, I'm a restorer, I'm not, but I'm interested in all that. But that's why I like my job so much. It's like we give this new MO for much new research. And then that's just fun to be part of, of the history of the painting.
Right. Well, what would we do without you? Conservators are our life's blood, that's for sure. You got another question here. Was there anything in the paint itself that suggested two different painters, i.e. two brothers?
Very good question. Yeah, the new book, I've read the draft. It will be fascinating. Two of my colleagues, thanks to COVID, sometimes there are good things out of this whole COVID thing. Yeah, they had a lot of time to go over all the analysis and the results, and after spending that many years up and close with the painting, they have some suggestions that there are different hands. And you can tell yourself if you go to the website and you just zoom in into the capitals of the niches from the lower tier, you can tell that those are painted by different hands. The big trick is whose hands, right? As long as we don't find the Hubert van Eyck painting, or even some people say, their sister painted too, as long as we cannot really attach another painting to Hubert van Eyck, it's going to be hard to put names on it. But at least we're going in the right direction, where we can differentiate different hands and different paint application styles. Because as you can imagine, with that inscription saying Hubert started it, Jan finished it, we looked 300 million times that what we were taking off was not Jan finishing Hubert, right? So obviously that was the main, the big elephant in the room when we made the discovery. So we are absolutely certain. But what we're also leaning towards to now, and that's mostly thanks to Hélène Dubois, who's writing her PhD on the material history of the painting, is that what we have removed is very likely that 1550 campaign on von Scorel and Blondel, which many museums in the world have paintings by those two artists, right? So that is a whole, and something I've been working on just with students at Princeton, and I like to develop more, the whole deontological approach of our job. Like, who are we to decide what are we uncovering and what are we leaving in place? For another lecture.
And then I was just sort of wondering, just to wrap up, because I know that you've been talking a lot already, but I was just wondering if there's something in particular that you take away from this entire journey, because it has been such a big part of your life now, living with this thing, inhabiting the space of these two artists. And what do you take away from it? I mean, aside from the incredible discoveries that have been
Oh,
made that you've
yeah.
described.
No, I often joke, and it's true. Like, there's been so many PhDs being written now with all the new discovery. The only one that nobody's writing is the interaction of the social interaction of having 8 conservators in a glass box for 6 years. It's really fascinating how you have to work together, and you're working on different panels, as I said, that belong to the same painting. You kind of have to become one in a strange way, and that is also what I miss most. I mean, that's I'm going to regret that forever, that I'm not there anymore to finish it. And I mean, it sounds really stupid, but it's really true. And you really become like a really tight group of people, to share all the discoveries, the excitement, but also the hard time. I mean, I said it in 45 minutes, but as you can imagine, a decision to throw a couple more million euros at a restoration is not something that's made lightly by a Flemish government or church wardens, for that matter. So you really go through all the emotions together. And so I think that was a big thing. And also just focusing on one painting for 6 years. I learned that, as much as I think I did a pretty good job, I'm more of a museum person. I like doing a Picasso Braque show, and next year doing a 15th century show. I just like a lot, and I'm everybody's different, and I it didn't distract me, but it was it's something I learned for myself, that I'm more of a museum person than something like this. But again, I have no regret whatsoever. The only regret I have is that I didn't finish the second phase, but Princeton was too good to not go to.
Right, of course. Well, you do have two more specific questions to follow up from Carmen Loyola. What are the security procedures for the employees and restorers when working with such an important piece? I'm sure they're probably pretty.
Oh, you mean to go into the space, or the people themselves? Like, no, I'll talk with yeah. So the going into the space, it was highly restricted. So if I could come and visit, we would tell her you can only come on Fridays, and you need to have a good reason why you need to come in the studio and not see it from the window, right? From the outside. That was the whole point of the window. I mean, the windows were very special glass. There was even, explosion proof metal in the walls. I mean, it was pretty crazy. But you have to, right? I mean, they are very concerned, not for somebody stealing it, although it is supposed to be the most stolen painting in the world, but I think more for crazy people who just want to do something to get attention. And
Right.
we had interesting visitors all the way, from President Macron to the royal family from Belgium, and obviously we let them in, right? But it was not as common that we would allow people in, and I think that was the right decision, especially since we are not hiding it. It's right there, and the glass is pretty big.
And then one last question. Can you tell us anything about the chemical constituents of the paint? Very specific technical.
Oh yeah. I mean, paint is a fascinating thing, right? So paint is always a pigment and a binding media. So you always need both in order to paint. So what do we know? I mean, that's Van Eyck has supposedly invented the oil paint. We know now that that's not the case, since we have mummy shrouds that go back centuries before Van Eyck that are completely painted in oil. But the Van Eyck brothers definitely took it to the next level, right? I mean, they really perfectioned the whole painting with oils. And they were just masters in doing that, because how do you paint with oil and have that many layers? That means they must have had other additives, whether it's dryers or even diluents, like things that evaporate. I mean, alcohol did exist, or turpentine, I mean, distillates, but I don't know, those are really hard to discover once a paint film is dry. And we made a lot of progress with identifying binding media, but it's still very complicated, and very often you still need significant original material that will be destroyed when you do the research. So luckily we're moving away from that destructive research. But imagine a painting that has been restored at least 20 times, if not more. All those things that the restorers put in there, whether it's glues or oils or waxes, all that have an impact on the analysis too, right? You can have the highest, most refined analytical tool. You will almost never have a pure sample. And therefore people, scientists are very excited when they find a little bit of paint that kind of ran behind the frame because they were painted while already sitting in their frames, right? So it's that those little things there, which we make a lot of progress with this science. And I think the first book, there's a little bit, but the second book, so every phase will get its own book. So the phase 2 book will have much more on the chemical part of the pigments, but also hypothesis on the actual media. But yeah, it's such a highly specialized field. That's why conservation scientists developed, right? I mean, we conservators, I mean, we can do a lot, but I mean, there aren't too many that can do everything perfectly, right? So it really developed in this subgrouping, which is conservation science. And are we happy that they exist, right, as a conservator? Because it's that working together with the curator and the art historian and the scientists that make for great projects, as Eyck knows. That's what makes it fascinating.
And that's what makes it fun for all of us.
Fun.
So you got 2 more questions, and then I think
Sure.
we probably should let you go.
That's good.
So you've got, what is the current total cost of the conservation work?
Good question. I should know that as being part of the International Commission. I would say it's more than 3 million euros. But to put that in perspective, right? I mean, the whole visitor center costs, 10 times that, right? So it's all relative. But I understand when people come, because once a week I would go outside and give a talk, and that was always the first question. That's why I'm surprised I didn't remember the exact number. I knew it till after the comma. Is that, what does that really mean, right? That number. I mean, it's not my salary, that's for sure. But it's an investment in the future, right? I mean, making a new road would cost 10 times more, and 300,000 people visit it. It has a big impact on tourism. So I always feel like I have to justify the number, but I was shocked how low the number was, to be honest.
Yeah.
Initially it was, I think, 2 million for 5 years. I mean, that was just crazy. How I always thought that was low to start with.
Great. And then one last question: were there any surface areas damaged beyond repair, and how do you prevent further damage?
Yeah, so one of the trickiest damages was a big part of the drapery of Saint John the Evangelist. So one of the 2, gray figures. I would almost say grisailles, but we discovered that they're technically not grisailles because there's yellow paint in them. So the previously known grisaille paintings. So that one has a rather big hole where we really had to make, my colleague Hubert had to make a lot of virtual in-paintings on the computer with a tablet and all, because there were a couple of options how the fold could have fallen. There weren't 3,000 of them, but there were at least 3 or 4. So there we did have to make a judgment call. And as I mentioned, right, everything's reversible. And in addition, it's well documented. And also, we didn't talk about that, but if you put a UV light or a black light on it, the whole thing would be dark. And again, you can go to the website, you can see that big hole I'm talking about on St. John the Evangelist, and you can see what we came up with. And maybe there's conservators on this call, but normally you don't inpaint for a computer screen, right? So you can zoom in, I don't know, this is my, already sorry if I didn't do a good job. You can zoom in, 300% on those images? So you could really see all our inpainting if you wanted to see it. And that created a kind of additional stress, I have to say, to the team, because, normally, if you have a normal viewing distance, we did a very good job. But here we were very concerned that when people started zooming in, that, you would start seeing our inpainting, which in some cases could be fine. But here we really decided we wanted to go illusionistic, meaning completely gone for a normal viewer. So just something to think about when you're zooming in too closely on my angel Gabriel.
Yeah. Well, we'll keep that in mind for sure. But I want to thank you again for taking the time to present this wonderful lecture to us. It's been a really fascinating thing to hear about. And we are very much looking forward to learning more from you and your next big project. So we'll be keeping in touch. And I hope you have a wonderful evening. And I hope I get to see you in person very, very soon.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. This was fun. Bye.
Bye-bye.